Book 3, The Professor, Section 2 of The Professor's House by Willa Cather. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. Book 3, The Professor, Section 2. All those summer days, while the professor was sending cheerful accounts of his activities to his family in France, he was really doing very little. He had begun in a desultory way to annotate the diary that Tom had kept on the mesa, in which he had noted down the details of each day's work among the ruins, along with the weather and anything unusual in the routine of their life. There was a minute description of each tool they found, of every piece of cloth and pottery, frequently accompanied by a very suggestive pencil sketch of the object, and a surmise as to its use and the kind of life in which it had played a part. To St. Peter, this plain account was almost beautiful, because of the stupidities it avoided and the things it did not say. If words had cost money, Tom couldn't have used them more sparingly. The adjectives were purely descriptive, relating to form and color, and were used to present the objects under consideration, not the young explorer's emotions. Yet through this austerity one felt the kindling imagination, the ardor and excitement of the boy, like the vibration in a voice when the speaker strives to conceal his emotion by using only conventional phrases. When the 1st of August came round, the professor realized that he had pleasantly trifled away nearly 2 months at a task which should have taken little more than a week. But he had been doing a good deal besides, something he had never before been able to do. St. Peter had always laughed at people who talked about daydreams, just as he laughed at people who naively confessed that they had an imagination. All his life his mind had behaved in a positive fashion. When he was not at work or being actively amused, he went to sleep. He had no twilight stage. But now he enjoyed this half-awake loafing with his brain as if it were a new sense, arriving late, like wisdom teeth. He found he could lie on his sandspit by the lake for hours and watch the 7 motionless pines drink up the sun. In the evening, after dinner, he could sit idle and watch the stars with the same immobility. He was cultivating a novel mental dissipation and enjoying a new friendship. Tom Outland had not come back again through the garden door, as he had so often done in dreams, but another boy had, the boy the professor had long ago left behind him in Kansas, in the Solomon Valley, the original, unmodified Gottfried St. Peter. This boy and he had meant, back in those faraway days, to live some sort of life together and to share good and bad fortune. They had not shared together, for the reason that they were unevenly matched. The young St. Peter who went to France to try his luck had a more active mind than the twin he left behind in the Solomon Valley. After his adoption into the Thoreau household, he remembered that other boy very rarely, in moments of homesickness. After he met Lillian Ormsley, St. Peter forgot that boy had ever lived. But now that the vivid consciousness of an earlier state had come back to him, the professor felt that life with this Kansas boy, little as there had been of it, was the realest of his lives, and that all the years between had been accidental and ordered from the outside. His career, his wife, his family were not his life at all, but a chain of events which had happened to him. All these things had nothing to do with the person he was in the beginning. The man he was now, the personality his friends knew, had begun to grow strong during adolescence, during the years when he was always consciously or unconsciously conjugating the verb to love, in society and solitude, with people, with books, with the sky and open country, in the lonesomeness of crowded city streets. When he met Lillian, it reached its maturity. From that time to this, existence had been a catching at handholds. One thing led to another, and one development brought on another, and the design of his life had been the work of this secondary social man, the lover. It had been shaped by all the penalties and responsibilities of being and having been a lover. Because there was Lillian, there must be marriage and a salary. Because there was marriage, there were children. Because there were children, and fervor in the blood and brain, books were born as well as daughters. His histories, he was convinced, had no more to do with his original ego than his daughters had. They were a result of the high pressure of young manhood. The Kansas boy who had come back to St. Peter this summer was not a scholar. He was a primitive. He was only interested in earth and woods and water. Wherever sun sunned and rain rained and snow snowed, wherever life sprouted and decayed, places were alike to him. He was not nearly so cultivated as Tom's old cliff dwellers must have been, and yet he was terribly wise. He seemed to be at the root of the matter, desire under all desires, truth under all truths. He seemed to know, among other things, that he was solitary and must always be so. He had never married, never been a father. He was earth and would return to earth. When white clouds blew over the lake like bellying sails, when the 7 pine trees turned red in the declining sun, he felt satisfaction and said to himself merely, "That is right." Coming upon a curly root that thrust itself across his path, he said, "That is it." When the maple leaves along the street began to turn yellow and waxy and were soft to the touch, like the skin on old faces, he said, "That is true, it is time." All these recognitions gave him a kind of sad pleasure. When he was not dumbly, deeply recognizing, he was bringing up out of himself long-forgotten, unimportant memories of his early childhood, of his mother, his father, his grandfather. His grandfather, old Napoleon Gottfried, used to go about lost in profound, continuous meditation, sometimes chuckling to himself. Occasionally at the family dinner table, the old man would try to rouse himself from motives of politeness, and would ask some kindly question, nearly always absurd and often the same one he had asked yesterday. The boys used to shout with laughter and wonder what profound matters could require such deep meditation and make a man speak so foolishly about what was going on under his very eyes. St. Peter thought he was beginning to understand what the old man had been thinking about, though he himself was but 52, and Napoleon had been well on in his 80s. There are only a few years at the last in which man can consider his estate, and he thought he might be quite as near the end of his road as his grandfather had been in those days. The professor knew, of course, that adolescence grafted a new creature into the original one, and that the complexion of a man's life was largely determined by how well or ill his original self and his nature as modified by sex rubbed on together. What he had not known was that, at a given time, that first nature could return to a man, unchanged by all the pursuits and passions and experiences of his life, untouched even by the tastes and intellectual activities which have been strong enough to give him distinction among his fellows, and to have made for him, as they say, a name in the world. Perhaps this reversion did not often occur, but he knew it had happened to him, and he suspected it had happened to his grandfather. He did not regret his life, but he was indifferent to it. It seemed to him like the life of another person. Along with other states of mind which attended his realization of the boy Gottfried came a conviction. He did not see it coming, it was there before he was aware of its approach, that he was nearing the end of his life. This conviction took its place so quietly, seemed so matter-of-fact, that he gave it little thought. But one day, when he realized that all the while he was preparing for the fall term, he didn't in the least believe he would be alive during the fall term, he thought he might better see a doctor. End of Book 3, The Professor, Section 2.